Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. This is going to be part 3 of the Rb20det rebuild. In this episode, we're going to start with putting the pistons back in the engine, but first I'm going to have to measure the ring gap of all the rings for this engine to make sure the clearance between the ends of the rings is right. The reason that's important is because if it's too close, especially, as the rings heat up and expand, they'll actually come into contact each other, then break the piston lip, especially in high boost, nitrous, kind of higher horsepower engines. So the first part, I need to go ahead and put the individual rings down into the cylinders, and I'm going to push them down a little bit with the actual piston, maybe about a third of the way down the bore, and then I'm going to be able to measure the gap between the ends of the rings, the two kind of ends, with the feeler gauge to see what the spacing there is. So on this engine, Nissan calls for 0.22 to 0.39 of a millimeter on the top ring, then 0.19 to 0.45 on the second ring, then 0.20 to 0.7 of a millimeter on the oil ring rails. That's going to be the two smaller rings on the oil ring, not the kind of scrunchy looking one. So I'm going to go ahead and start here with number 1, then work my way down the engine, checking them all. These are aftermarket Hastings rings, so they're likely sized a little bit on the bigger side already, so I'll be surprised if I have to make much modification to these rings. Okay, so I've measured all the rings, and it looks like all the end gaps are great. They're all a little bit on the bigger side, which is great for this engine since I'm going to be pushing a little more boost and a little more heat, and I don't want to, have an issue with that piston crown cracking. You can see I already put number 6 in, to make sure that it went in well, that everything fit well, and it was just easier off camera. So now I'm going to go ahead and start installing the piston rings on the individual piston. So we're going to start on the bottom here with the oil rings. So you need to start with the wavy ring because it gets kind of retained by the two smaller oil ring rails, so that has to go on first. So then I'm going to go ahead and install the two oil ring rails next. Those are going to go in that kind of groove that's on the wavy oil ring. Sorry, I don't know what the technical term for that one is. So I got the first one on. You can see that little split right there in the ring. So now I'm going to go ahead and install the second oil ring. It's going to be about 120 degrees, the gap in it from the first oil ring I installed, which is going to be about 120 degrees from the gap that's in the actual spring, or the wavy spring ring. So up next I'm going to install the second compression ring, the lower down one. It's going to be this black ring here. It is directional on this ring, so it has markings telling me which way at the top. That varies on your rings, but there should be a marking and there should be instructions with your engine depending on the engine. But for this ring and this engine, it does have a marking on the top, a little circle. The reason for that is the top edge of this ring is actually kind of beveled. Be careful putting this one on. It is a lot stiffer ring and a lot easier to break than those oil rings, and you definitely don't want to have to do that and wait for another ring to get all the way here from Australia. So up next, I'm going to go ahead and install the top ring. Its direction doesn't really matter. It's beveled both ways on this ring. So I'm going to go ahead and install that now. I'm sorry about the camera work. My other camera went dead for a little while and I didn't realize it, so I kind of lost the shots here other than the above camera. So just like the oil rings, I'm positioning the ring gaps of the ring in 120 degrees increments. I'll post a picture of how it's supposed to be here. This is kind of standard for all 4 strokes. Usually I put the compression ring gaps on the intake side, kind of 120 degrees near the first intake valve, then the other one near the other one. Then I put the oil ring gaps usually towards the exhaust side. So now I'm using my piston ring compressor to go ahead and install this first piston here. You technically don't have to have it, but it makes it way easier to have it, especially for these automotive ones with bigger and stouter rings than like some of the motorcycles I've done in the past. So you just basically put it in there, clamp it down until it's sort of snug, but not too tight that you can't get the piston out. Then get ready to put it into the cylinder. So I'm getting ready to install number 3 here in the middle. I'm going to make sure that the crank pin is all the way down and farthest away. That makes it easier not to nick the crank journal with the pins on the rod or the sharp edges on it. Some people tape it up, but I don't think that's necessary as long as you're careful. So I'm going to go ahead and put some oil in this cylinders, or all the cylinders, and keep working on. I am using some of the assembly lube on the rod bearings though, as I put them together and put them into the engine here. When you're installing this, make sure that the oil squirter gap on the piston, or the clearance for it, is on the correct side. That's of course the easy way to tell on this engine that the piston is going in the right way. So now I'm going to go ahead and tap it in with the bottom of my dead blow hammer here gently. Again, make sure it's not too tight, but you want to make sure that it's snug enough that the rings are actually compressed as they go into the cylinder. So like I mentioned a second ago, as you're pushing this piston down, make sure that the rod is not going to nick those crank journals or the bearings or anything else in there. So I'm just going to slowly push it down. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the rod cap onto the rod, making sure it's of course the right orientation on it. It will have markings on this one. It has the cylinder numbers marked on the sides that go together. So now I'm going to do number 4 cylinder exactly the same way as I did number 3, so I'll go ahead and start on that now. Okay, so now it's time to go ahead and torque down the nuts on the main caps. So it's going to be a 2-stage process, just like I did when we were checking the clearances on it. First to 22.5 to 28.5 Newton meters. Then from then the second torque is going to be from 38.5 to 41 Newton meters. So I'm going to first set my torque wrench to 25 Newton meters and do the first set of torques, or it's first set torquing it down. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and set my torque wrench to 42 Newton meters and do the second round of torques on these nuts. So up next, I'm going to go ahead and do cylinders 2 and 5. The reason I'm doing these in pairs is because the crank is in the same plane at the same time, so it makes it easy to do the pair at the same time. Kind of like on a fuller cylinder, how you do 1 and 4 and 2 and 3 together. Okay, so all the pistons are in. They're all torqued down. I'm gonna go ahead and check to make sure I got the torque correct on the oil squirters because I can't 100% remember and it was higher than I thought it was supposed to be. But anyway, thanks for watching and I hope you join me for part 4.